Are you ready for some smart, plain talk on politics, Israel, and the law? It's the Andrew Parker Show. Let's roll. Welcome to another episode of the Andrew Parker Show. And boy, do we have a special show for you today. Really, I'm very excited about the opportunity to talk to one of the most renowned experts on the Arab-Israeli conflict as it relates to international law and the confusion that so many people have about statements made that Israel is repeatedly in violation of international law, how that is affected by U.S. policy, by UN policy and decisions. And our guest today can, well, frankly, clear that up for a lot of us. This is the opportunity for you to become educated, for you to understand facts rather than opinion or, quite frankly, misinformation or even lies. And that is because our guest is Eugene Kontorovich. Professor Kontorovich teaches at George Mason's Antonin Scalia School of Law, is the director of its Center for International Law in the Middle East. He had previously been a professor for some 11 years at Northwestern School of Law. He is, as I have said, and I've heard him speak a number of times, an expert on international law and constitutional law, understands both U.S. constitutional law, but also the basic law in the state of Israel and the impacts that it has. He's published over 30 academic articles in leading law reviews and peer-reviewed journals. I was interested in the fact that he worked with clerk for Judge Richard Posner of the Seventh Circuit, one of the great jurists in American jurisprudence ever. And Professor Kontorovich is also the head of the International Law Department at the Kohelet Policy Forum, a Jerusalem-based think tank. And as I said, he is recognized as one of the preeminent experts on international law and the Arab-Israeli conflict. He is a commentator, really is called upon to provide his opinion on history and the law by major news organizations, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, NPR News, across the political spectrum, Associated Press, the LA Times, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. There are few that cross over like Professor Kontorovich does, and we are so fortunate to have him with us on the Andrew Parker Show today. Welcome, Professor.
Hey, thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me here.
So the last time Professor Kontorovich and I spoke was a number of years ago when he was in the Twin Cities speaking to the Jewish Community Relations Council on the subjects of international law and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Since that time, I believe in 2013, I attended as a lawyer from the Midwest and one of 100 lawyers across the world, a conference put on by the Foreign Ministry of the State of Israel in Jerusalem to talk about lawfare. And there are few that know as much about lawfare, the BDS movement, et cetera. We're going to talk a little bit later with Professor Kontorovich about that. But first, and we're going to talk about Iran. We won't lose out on the top top line stories, which, everybody is following today, but it has such an enormous impact on the Arab-Israeli conflict. We're going to talk about that too. But Professor, first, I would like to delve into really your expertise. I am going to say a term or a phrase, and I'd like you to describe what people generally think about as it relates to that phrase, and then what the truth is. Because there are so many things in the Middle East, particularly as it relates to Israel, that are false. So let me start with the phrase occupied territory.
So, occupied territory is an accurate term to refer to the areas called the West Bank and Gaza, which were in fact occupied territories for the period 1948 to 1967. So these territories in that time were in fact occupied.
Yeah, wait a minute. The Arabs controlled the land at that time.
The West Bank is the name given to the Judea and Samaria, part of the Mandate for Palestine, when it was invaded and taken over by Jordan. And Jordan had no sovereign power title and occupied the territory. Gaza Strip is something that never existed before 1948, like the West Bank. These were simply, when Israel declared independence, all of the surrounding Arab countries invaded it to try to prevent the creation of a Jewish state in the area. They were partially unsuccessful. That's why we have the State of Israel today. But they were partially successful. And they took parts of the territory intended for this state and occupied it. And there was no, before 1948, you will see no reference to anything called the West Bank. Not on a map, not in a history book. The West Bank is simply that area of the land of Israel, the area intended for a Jewish state, that was occupied by Jordan in their attempt to take over the whole thing. And that's why it's called the West Bank, because that's what the Jordanians called it. It was to the west of the Jordan River from the country of Jordan. The Gaza Strip is the part that Egypt took as it went up along the coast, trying to seize Tel Aviv. They were trying to take all of Israel, but they took these parts and gave them different names. And they were, in fact, occupied. They were under military occupation until 1967.
By Jordan and Egypt.
Exactly. And in 1967, they ceased to be occupied territories, and that is exactly when many people started to call them occupied territories, because no one cared about them being occupied so long as they were being occupied by Jordan and Egypt.
Yeah,
today,
and they became...
Today, they are not occupied territories. I want to make
No. The indigenous people to those areas are the Jewish people. And you can't occupy your own land.
Indigenous, and also with a claim of sovereign title for the state of Israel, which was supposed to be in the area of the Mandate for Palestine. So the League of Nations in the 1920s created a whole bunch of mandatory territories in the Middle East. Each one became an independent country. Lebanon was a mandate. Jordan was a mandate, part of the mandatory system. Syria was part of the mandatory system. Iraq. And all of them inherited exactly, precisely the borders of the previous mandatory territory. Even though in all of these cases, they included different ethnic groups. Some of them were less happy to be part of the state. Every country has a minority that is typically less happy to be part of the country. But only in one case, Israel, which was, again, at the moment of its creation, invaded by its neighboring countries, parts of that territory were temporarily taken. In 1967, Israel retook this territory. And at that point, I would say these territories stopped being occupied territories.
So when we consider occupied territory, when we consider the West Bank and Gaza, and that the Jews were the indigenous people to that land, and that they retook it, and therefore they cannot be occupied territories, what do you say to those protesting on U.S. campuses and to those who are outside the Federal Reserve Bank building here in Minneapolis this morning and every morning over the last many weeks with flags and with slogans? You know, there are only about 6 people out there, but they've got their slogans. And the biggest phrase, the biggest letters that they're writing are "Free Palestine." What about that phrase?
So Palestine does not mean what they think it means. I mean, Palestine could mean anything, but historically, it's not meant what they think it means. Palestine really is a word that has meant 2 things in history. Palestine was the name given to the Jewish kingdom of Judea after it was conquered, dissolved, put down by the Romans after a revolt in the 1st century against Roman imperial power. They renamed it from Judea, which is, of course, the state of the Jews, to Palestine, which was a name taken from the Philistine population that lived in the coastal area of Phoenician people. So that was a Roman name they gave to this area. It had nothing to do with Arab people, because Arab people had, at that point, were still in Arabia and had not yet moved west with the Islamic conquests of the 7th century. Then Palestine was used as the name given by the League of Nations to the area that was supposed to become a national home for the Jewish people in the Holy Land. Why did they call it Palestine? Kind of arbitrary. They looked in the history books. That's what it used to be called in the Roman time. So that's what they call it. So Palestine, as a geographic name, has nothing to do with actually really either Jews or Arabs. It's simply a geographic name. So it's nice for Palestine to be free, but it doesn't mean an Arab state in Palestine. And in fact, there already is an Arab state in Palestine, which is the Kingdom of Jordan. Because when the League of Nations created the mandate for Palestine, it was very large and included the area we would today call Israel, Judea and Samaria, and the entire Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So Jordan is itself an Arab country in Palestine. Now, maybe they want to free Palestine, that part of Palestine, from Jordanian Hashemite rule, but I doubt it.
No, I doubt it. I want to turn your attention now to Barack Obama. At the end of his 8 years, as you recall, the United Nations passed a resolution which effectively made the Western Wall illegal territory under international law, they claim. And the United States had vetoed this type of resolution many times prior to Obama. Obama did not veto it. And it now is a part of UN history through the resolution. What are your thoughts about the phrase East Jerusalem?
Right. So the East Jerusalem, where did this idea come from? So before 1948, there was no such thing as East Jerusalem. So up until 1948, which was relatively recently, Jerusalem had always been a unified city. Under the Ottomans, under the British, for really as far back as we know, there has never been a divided Jerusalem. How did Jerusalem come to be divided? So in 1948, Jordan invaded Israel with the intention of completely wiping out the Jewish presence. Partially unsuccessful, partially successful. So they managed to take the area of Judea and Samaria, and they got into the city of Jerusalem, which is relatively far east, close to Jordan. And they actually managed to, so Jerusalem has an old part, which is the old city, which is a walled city and some areas around it, and then the new part. And they took the old city, very early on, which is on the eastern part. And the Jews were not able, the Jewish army was not able to retake the old city because there's a deep valley underneath it and there's walls around it. So they managed to keep part of Jerusalem, but Jordan conquered part of it in 1948. Now, they immediately expelled all of the Jews living there. And for as long as we know, that city has had a Jewish majority until 1948 when all the Jews were expelled.
Heck, I think the city of David is a part of it, way back to King David.
Way back to thousands of years. So at that point, it became a divided city. Now, divided cities are usually not a happy thing, right? Berlin was a divided city. That's because the Soviets managed to control part of it under East Germany. Today, the capital of Cyprus is a divided city because the Turks occupy part of it. That's not considered a good thing. Similarly, Jordan occupied part of this city. So when Israel retook the eastern part of its capital city in 1967, this was not conquering some separate city. It was simply ending the illegal occupation that Jordan began in 1948. And to say that because Jordan managed to seize part of Jerusalem in 1948, now there's two Jerusalems forever, and there's an Eastern Jerusalem where Jews are not allowed to live, is to retroactively validate Jordan's aggression, conquest, and ethnic cleansing of Jerusalem. Now, even in 1948, when Israel was not such a popular country, it was a weak country, nobody thought that what Jordan was doing was legit. Countries did not recognize it. So why would we now say whatever Jordan conquered is forever a separate territory? And if that's the case, that you can conquer territory and make it yours, as Jordan claimed to do of Jerusalem, then surely Israel could do the opposite in 1967. And if it's not the case, then Israel is simply retaking its own territory in 1967.
And what was the nature of the UN resolution that Obama did not veto? What impact does that have?
As a legal matter, it has no impact. It was not a Article 7 resolution, as it's called, Chapter 7 resolution. It was the opinion of the Security Council, and they expressed their views, but it is not binding in a legal way. And it's important to say, the Security Council is not a legislature. When it adopts decisions, at least on the Chapter 6, it is not making new international rules. So the Security Council does not have the power to redraw the boundaries of countries. Now, it could have had a diplomatic impact. In fact, it did have a brief diplomatic impact, but that was quickly erased by the fact that President Trump completely reversed the policy of that resolution. And in fact, he moved the embassy of the United States not just to Jerusalem, but to so-called Eastern Jerusalem. And it's very important to say that President Biden did not change that. So even under President Biden, the embassy was in this so-called Eastern Jerusalem, because there is no Eastern Jerusalem. And so I think we could say both Trump and even Biden have rejected this notion of a divided Jerusalem, and it's really an idea for the history books at this point.
And on the Andrew Parker Show, you are not going to hear reference to the West Bank, East Jerusalem, occupied territory, all phrases that came into being internationally post 1948 or 1967, but really got embedded in the lexicon of U.S. politics and policy by President Jimmy Carter when he shifted all of the media coverage, et cetera, from very, pro-Israel previously as the, quote, underdog to really pro-Arab. We're talking to Professor Eugene Kontorovich, professor of law at the Antonin Scalia School of Law at George Mason University and also head of Middle East Studies and the executive director at the Kohelet Policy Forum in Israel. We're going to be right back after a short break from all those sponsors that we have out there, and so grab another glass of water, another Coca-Cola, or the like, and we'll be right back to talk about what's happening in Gaza, but more so what's happening with Iran. With Professor Eugene Kontorovich. We'll be right back. And now, a word from our sponsors. A record of success second to none. Parker Daniels Keyboard Law Firm, the numbers tell the story. The last 5 cases our lawyers have brought to trial have resulted in million and multi-million-dollar verdicts for our plaintiff clients and 0 defense verdicts for our defense clients. Put simply, we try cases and we win cases. Hi, I'm Andrew Parker. At Parker Daniels Keyboard, we take our work personally and we go the extra mile. That is why some of the biggest law firms, locally and nationally, send cases to us to handle when they can't. If you have a challenging and critically important business or personal legal dispute that must be favorably resolved, whether regarding a contract matter, a business divorce, a real estate dispute, an employment dispute, a civil rights or defamation matter, plain talk, if it's a big deal, contact us at Parker Daniels Keyboard. Wise counsel, winning results. Go to parkerdk.com. If you're considering options for a 1031 exchange, True North recommends checking out Walton Global. They're a land investment company with over 46 years of experience and a very impressive track record. Their clients are some of America's largest home builders, and True North recommends them highly. You can visit True North's website to get more information at investtruenorth.com or call at 619-455-0275. That's 619-455-0275. We're back. It's the Andrew Parker Show. And this is just one of the best because fact and fiction, myths and truths. And when you can have someone like Professor Eugene Kontorovich speak to you about the long history of the Arab-Israeli conflict and what are facts versus myths, what are truths versus lies, it's really a wonderful opportunity. So, Professor, before we start talking a bit more about Gaza, I want to circle back to the law for 1 minute. There's a question I want to ask you about that I heard you speak about previously, and I think is important for listeners to hear. And it's on a subject that you are one of the most learned anywhere on, and that is universal jurisdiction and international law. We hear about the fact that Israeli leaders could be picked up and thrown in jail if they're caught on, even in Europe and on European countries' soil. What the UN has done, what the International Criminal Court has done? What is the effect of that on the state of Israel generally?
So you mentioned the concept of universal jurisdiction, just some general background. The International Criminal Court, just so your listeners know, is not like a court that sits every day and hears crimes, serious crimes from around the world. It's a treaty organization, because in international law there's a basic concept which you can only have jurisdiction, country can only have jurisdiction over crimes that occur within its territory or involve its nationals. Now, the International Criminal Court is not a country. It's a treaty organization created by a bunch of countries that agreed to join together and give some of their territorial jurisdiction to the ICC to deal with serious crimes like war crimes and genocide. Now, America is not one of those countries who joined the ICC. So the ICC does not have jurisdiction in America. Israel is also not a country that joined the ICC. In fact, countries that are most likely to be engaged in military conflict generally do not join the ICC. And America is an example. Now, so the ICC, they came up with a clever trick to exercise jurisdiction over Israel. They invented a country, which they called the State of Palestine. And then they let that country, they claimed that that country was one of the countries that joined them and gave them jurisdiction. Now, there is no such country. It doesn't have a seat at the UN. It's not recognized by many leading countries in the world. And certainly, even if it did exist, its borders are completely unclear, heavily disputed with Israel. But the ICC, in an unprecedented action, has not recognized other contested territories as states, like Taiwan or Kosovo, purported to recognize this non-state of Palestine. And then they said, and everything that happens in this state of Palestine is going to be under our jurisdiction. And using this device, they've since indicted Prime Minister Netanyahu and the former defense minister for allegedly starving the people of Gaza. So it doesn't seem, we don't know of anybody who was actually starved in Gaza. There's no real evidence of starvation in Gaza. There are constant warnings that there's about to be starvation in Gaza, but without the actual starvation ever seemingly happening. And in fact, the United Nations body that monitors food insecurity around the world has actually said that reports that there are starvation that are inaccurate and based on bad evidence. And in fact, more calories have come in after the war into Gaza than before. That does not mean that Hamas distributes those calories equitably, but that's a Hamas issue, not an Israel issue. So they've issued these warrants against Israeli leaders. What does it mean for Israel? Practically not much. Obviously, it has not prevented Israel from going on to have its greatest military victory, arguably, in its history, and one of the greatest military victories in modern history. So it has not slowed down Prime Minister Netanyahu, but it's designed to be a diplomatic and rhetorical tool, so that proponents of boycotting Israel, people who want to portray Israel as a pariah state, can say, look, they were indicted by the ICC, despite the fact that these proceedings were completely illegitimate, rejected in an unprecedented way by many leading Western countries, including the United States, and it now appears, according to articles by the Wall Street Journal, the entire warrant process was cooked up by the ICC prosecutor to head off Me Too style sex assault allegations against himself, for which he is now under investigation. I can tell you, and as a lawyer I think you'd understand this, if a prosecutor in America wound up under investigation for wide-ranging and systematic accusations of sexual assault, as the ICC prosecutor is, certainly the warrants that he issued in the weeks before he was indicted would come under extraordinary scrutiny and would likely be challenged and dismissed. It would, in fact, be a field day for criminals. But
it reminds me of Fannie Willis.
Exactly.
Indeed. No, exactly. And, calling into question the ICC is not a difficult thing to do, but they've gone well beyond the pale that, is set generally for them. I was on a panel recently speaking on the subject of the rule of law, and the issues turned to the Arab-Israeli conflict, the conflict in Gaza in particular, quite quickly, interestingly. And a professor at a law school here in Minnesota was also on the panel. and she is a very active member of an organization that is part of the ICC, or very involved with the ICC, and was singing its praises. And I interrupted her and I said, I have to say, I feel very triggered by your comments. And she understood, as most people there understood, exactly what was meant by the comments. And I said the ICC is one of, if not the most anti-Semitic international organization of anywhere. And you are singing its praises. It's shocking. It's dismaying. And I can't sit here and allow you to do it without a response. And so we went back and forth on it. I wanted to you brought up humanitarian aid to Gaza. You brought up starvation accusations as it relates to Gaza. I want to turn to the Israel-Hamas war related to Gaza. Everyone knows that Israel left Gaza lock, stock, and barrel in the mid-2000s, and it was under and has been under complete Palestinian control ever since. They decided to elect Hamas. Hamas has controlled that area ever since. What about the phrase genocide in Gaza? In terms of the legal term genocide?
I don't even know where to start, but let's start with the facts. So, Hamas, the government of Gaza, invaded Israel on October 7th, killed thousands of people, took hostages, and Israel, under the doctrine of self-defense, has every right to go in and fight in Gaza. In fighting in Gaza, Israel must abide by the laws of war. And the laws of war say that you can only strike military targets. Israel has only been striking military targets. Now, if you put a command post or an arms depot under the hospital, under the Geneva Conventions, that hospital becomes a military target. Under the laws of war, you can only strike military targets, but it doesn't mean that mere existence of civilian casualties is illegal. You cannot intentionally target purely civilian objects. But the death of civilians is unfortunately a common correlate of war. In fact, if you look back at the wars America has fought in the 20th century, it's hard to find a war without civilian casualties. The difference between most wars, certainly most wars in urban landscapes, and Israel's war in Gaza is Israel has managed to keep civilian casualties to an almost unprecedented minimum. That is to say, it seems out of all of the casualties in Gaza, roughly 50% of them have been Hamas fighters, which is an extraordinary ratio for urban combat. I mean, just to give you a recent example, Iran managed to kill 0% military combatants in its attacks on Israel. Does that make Iran guilty of genocide? I think Iran is clearly guilty of war crimes, but not genocide. So what this argument does is it uses the fact of civilian casualties, though they are fairly low in proportion to the military casualties, as prima facie evidence of genocide. By this standard, the U.S. war in Iraq, which resulted in tens of thousands or more civilian casualties, Vietnam, Korea, World War II, and the Civil War, all of which had hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties, would all be genocide. Now, that's not anything that people are generally saying. So it's an attempt to fundamentally redefine genocide, simply to accuse the Jewish state of this great crime. And this term, genocide, which was created specifically to describe the atrocities committed against the Jews in the Holocaust. So the idea is to basically flip the script and say, that particularly uniquely bad thing that was done to the Jews, they do it too, so why care?
The hypocrisy of it. I want to ask you, Professor, more of an opinion question based upon your study of history in the Middle East and as it relates to the state of Israel, the land of Israel, and the Arab-Israeli conflict, and specifically the war in Gaza. Is there a path to peace as it relates to the Palestinian issue, both in Gaza with Hamas, but also with the Palestinian Authority, which is a man-made institution that is not very old in its creation? The Palestinian Authority in the so-called West Bank, which is Judea and Samaria. Is there a path to peace there?
So I'm not a big path to peace kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
That is to say, just because there's a problem doesn't mean there's a great solution. But first, let's ask, how big is this problem? This place where all the Middle East PhDs and all the Middle East studies experts want to make peace so much, Israel and Judea and Samaria, is the area where maybe we have the greatest peace in the Middle East, especially in Judea and Samaria. So when you look at Gaza, when you look at Syria, when you look at Lebanon, Judea and Samaria is a much more peaceful area. It has far less political violence. And I think the reason is very clear, because the Israeli army has control of security there. Gaza only became the mess that it currently is. It only became capable of launching constant missiles at Israel and ultimately invading Israel and massacring civilians and kidnapping civilians and majorly destabilizing the entire Middle East only after Israeli troops withdrew. So we see what doesn't work. What doesn't work is Israeli withdrawal and ceding territory to terrorist groups. So we can perhaps infer from that that at least a minimal condition of peace is Israeli security control.
You know, I want to turn to Iran now. The question arises whether we might end Iran's nuclear ambitions with 14 mop bombs being dropped on it, or whether we were more likely to end their ambitions by having a 150-page JCPOA with appendices and analyses and have the Iranians sign it. Which do you think might have gotten the job done better? And more importantly, of course, as my question need not be comical as this issue is not, more importantly, with these bombs being dropped, where do you think we go from here? Is there a bright future, or is it just same old, same old?
JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal created by President Obama, was not designed to keep Iran from achieving a nuclear weapon. It was designed to temporarily delay it and then enable it. So the 14 bunker busters were designed exactly to destroy it. Now, some people say, well, look, they can try again, they can try to reconstitute it, it's not forever. I don't find that a serious criticism, because there's not many things in life other than death that are forever, but in politics and in the worlds of ideas, few things are forever. The Allies won World War One, but they had to fight World War Two. They won World War Two, but then were faced with Soviet communism, which posed many of the same threats of global tyranny. So this notion of some kind of button that you push and then kumbaya for all times, I think is a kind of nirvana fallacy. that encourages simplistic thinking. That said, it seems like the Iranian nuclear program has been set back a long time. That's good, because in that long time, further things can be done to ensure that Iran does not create a nuclear device, and those measures are also crucial. There's really no end, because history doesn't end.
Yeah,
But at
and
the same time, I do think the future is much brighter, because for 25 years, and certainly much more acutely since President Obama decided that the Iranian nuclear independence is going to be a cornerstone of his foreign policy, the Middle East and the broader world has lived under the shadow of a potential Iranian nuclear breakout. That shadow has been temporarily lifted.
it has indeed, but the apocalyptic, religiously zealous regime in Iran has not changed its stripes. And I am not normally a big supporter of ceasefires when they do not achieve objectives. Oftentimes, you end up in a worse position than where you started. I don't know that that's the case here in terms of a worse position from where you started, but it certainly has not taken advantage, frankly, of all of the various, well, the Rubik's Cube, which now is aligned, giving an opportunity to really make a change in the Middle East and to divine and create that path for true peace with a number of Arab countries who oppose Iran signing peace deals with Israel, as
I think
well
that's
as Iran being neutered.
I think the peace deals are going to come. As for Iran being neutered or some kind of regime change, that can only come from within.
Yes.
Nobody can change a regime through air power alone. Uh, this was an amazing 12 days, which accomplished extraordinary objectives. And I wouldn't criticize it sort of in retrospect, because if someone had said 2 weeks ago, could you imagine that in 2 weeks Iran's nuclear program is going to be destroyed for now, and there will be zero Israeli military casualties and zero US military casualties? I think everyone would say that sounds like a dream. And that's the dream that has been realized. So again, there's some kind of a desire for some kind of a messianic process that will stop history and not require further efforts on our part. That's not going to happen, but we're in an infinitely better situation than we were just 2 weeks ago.
That
What's
is Professor, yeah, it is a few weeks. That is Professor Eugene Kontorovich, special guest with us today on the Andrew Parker Show. What a wonderful show. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, sharing knowledge and background and history, as well as the law, and grounding it, frankly, in common sense. Uh, Israel, not just a great ally of the United States, but a light unto the nations, one that has brought so much to the world, that a strong Israel is certainly America first and in the interest of America both. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today on the Andrew Parker Show. I hope to have you on again down the trail, and I wish you and all Israelis, including my son, who's a citizen of Israel, all the best as we go forward in these, uncertain times.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
That is the Andrew Parker Show for this episode. I think you all ought to go to the andrewparkershow.com and follow us, subscribe, go to YouTube, do the same, watch. You can call and text us, or I think you can call as well, but certainly text us at what do we got? 952-522 2818. That's 952-522-2818. And we'll get your questions in an upcoming episode and make sure that they are all answered. Until next time, be kind to your neighbor. For more Smart Plain Talk, go to theandrewparkershow.com. Learn about all of your listening and viewing options. And remember, all the great things are simple, and many can be expressed in a single word: freedom, justice, honor, duty, mercy, hope. This episode of The Andrew Parker Show is sponsored by Parker Daniels Keyboard and True North Private Investments.
Did your employer make you sign a promissory note when joining the company, and now you want to leave, but you're afraid your firm will pursue you personally for that debt? This is Jesse Keyboard from the law firm Parker Daniels Keyboard. I recently represented a client who had signed such a note, and I was able to get them out of their $500,000 debt to their company, which allowed them the freedom to exit a bad employment situation and enter a much better one. Meeting our clients' objectives is our focus at Parker Daniels Keyboard, and in this regard, we win. Our experienced trial team of lawyers at Parker Daniels Keyboard have secured major victories in state and federal courts across the country and through arbitration. We have the legal expertise in all types of business disputes, labor and employment matters, real estate matters, shareholder disputes, financial transactions, security issues, and appeals. For wise counsel, winning results, contact us at Parker Daniels Keyboard, a premier litigation law firm that provides efficient, aggressive, and innovative solutions to complex legal problems. Wise counsel, winning results. Go to parkerdk.com.
Are you a high-income earner or a business owner looking to secure your financial future? At True North Private Investments, they focus on helping you break free from the limitations of traditional investments. Diversify your portfolio with private equity, real estate, and credit opportunities built to thrive in any market condition. Plus, their tailored tax strategies are designed to help you keep more of what you've earned. Your success deserves a smarter approach. Choose True North to grow, protect, and optimize your wealth. Call them today at 619-455-0275 or visit investtruenorth.com.